Now, let us delve deeper into the discussion regarding how the matrix blocks those who are waking up. The matrix is a complex system that has a very specific coding. As soon as someone begins crawling out of this system, the system begins to read that movement as a critical error, perceiving it as a threat to itself. Thus, this system activates a retention code, effectively keeping the individual in a dormant state. What exactly does this mean? It means that through our own thoughts, through our emotional states like deep apathy, constant anxiety, or frantic haste, yes, through certain inner dialogues, through logic, or even through other people around us, we are guided back into sleep. In other words, sometimes your thoughts are actually far from being your own personal thoughts or your own true states. Sudden anxiety is not always your own anxiety, and sometimes it's very difficult to recognize where your truth is and where you've simply connected to the collective ego, and thus you become subject to and controlled by this system. This system will very subtly and carefully lead you back to where you started again. Yes, back into a deep sleep, because that is how it has been programmed. This programming is designed to keep you in a state of inner emptiness, to keep you in a state of meaninglessness, in a state of apathy, in a state where you are always trying to rush through life, to conform to something outside yourself, to compare yourself to someone else, and in a state of linear time, that is, when we live in the past or the future. And this is also what takes us away from the present moment, because only the present moment is where life is. In the here and now, you are completely invisible to the system. In other words, this programming simply doesn't have time to react to you when you're in the here and now. So, what should you do then? There is only one way, to take the position of the observer. That is, you don't need to fight with anyone. It's pointless. You're playing on completely different fields and with different sticks. You're not even playing the same game at all. You are not in direct competition with the system. Accordingly, the only way, so to speak, to successfully escape from this system or not to drift back into a state of sleep is precisely the position of the observer is when you step back and watch your thoughts, your state, your feelings, and your emotions from the outside, understanding that right now this is not your true self and you can simply observe it. You rise above the system and the system simply stops registering you.
I'd actually like to start with a question right away. What does this concept mean to you? The matrix, just so we don't get confused by terminology and can understand each other, what is it really?
For me, the concept of the matrix doesn't really exist. What it describes is essentially a kind of egregorial aggregate. It's the sum of all sorts of egregores, again, worldviews, ideas about how one should or shouldn't live, and so on and so forth. The collection of egregores forms a single unified energy informational structure for the whole planet. You could call that the matrix? Well, yes, it exists. And it basically describes it absolutely correctly. If you take the position of an observer, you completely disidentify from everything, your thoughts, your emotions. You simply observe the process in the here and now. There is no other life except in the present moment, here and now. The past is, well, basically just our memories, and the future doesn't exist yet, right? What truly exists is the present moment, here and now. Everything else is just certain games of the mind, games of egregores, and so on. Yes, and by being in the position of the observer, you sort of step out of all these ego egregorial structures and see things with a clearer perspective. So basically, yes, this is quite an effective technique. It's a kind of initial, as they say, first awakening, just to start at least seeing that not all thoughts are your own thoughts. This is absolutely true. And not all feelings are your own feelings.
So, can we say that if a person begins to ask deep questions, probably more of those that are not directly connected to our physical plane, does that already serve as an indication that the person is truly enlightened or awakened, or are they simply taking a step toward it?
Well, it's more like they're taking a step toward it.
And what's the difference between being enlightened and being awakened? Is there any distinction?
Again, we're running into my favorite thing, terminology, right? Every person understands it in their own unique way. When you start to disidentify from your mind, from your current earthly personality, in which you've become deeply entrenched, you begin to feel this subtle sense of spiritual transcendence that starts to break through from there, from within, what I call the higher self or the true self or spirit, whatever you prefer. Again, it's a simple matter of terminology, not of practice. And at a certain point, this light, you really start to feel it. It is perceived exactly as light, this particular transcendence of yours. You genuinely feel it as light that begins to emanate from you. Roughly speaking, you sit there trembling in meditation, you feel this light that is literally coming out of you. What is enlightenment? Enlightenment, essentially, if we truly take a moment to dive deep into the terminology, can be defined as a sort of clearing. When there is a clearing found within a space, it simply means there is some kind of material that was present there. through which light passes. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a clearing. Can you call a completely cloudless sky with the bright golden sun simply shining down a clearing? In all likelihood, the answer is no, because that's already complete holiness or complete luminosity, as it's also called. I'm not a fan of terminology, but at least this is more or less coherent, what I'm saying now. And it's clear, right? So there is awakening. A person simply understands that, as it were, he is not a personality, he is not you, he is not Masha, don't fall asleep. He realized that he is most likely something else. So he took up the position of an observer. And what's interesting is that he directly catches that these are thoughts, not his own thoughts. This one's from advertising, that one's from political propaganda. This is, in a way, a certain feeling of awakening. Upon waking up from his deep sleep, he came to realize that not everything in this world is exactly as he once thought. It is then that a very profound enlightenment finally comes to him. That is to say, by fully immersing himself in his own true self, he reaches a state of transcendence, reaching for his own inner light, which begins to shine brightly through the heavy blocks of his mind. And then, through the steady passage of time, little by little, these mental blocks become smaller and smaller. He achieves and embodies what is commonly called true holiness or a state of pure luminosity. Each stage of this process can be described using any terms. You could even just say stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, that's all. But the meaning remains exactly the same. That's why here I am speaking as a practitioner. To wake up, to become awakened is easy. Well, I mean, it's not difficult. It's just that you watch some thought-provoking movies about spiritual awakening. Or for example, you are watching this video right now and basically you wake up realizing like, that is really interesting. Maybe there is something deeper to this. Becoming enlightened is a bit more of a longer path, but actually it's not difficult either. Again, in the school, as I mentioned in previous videos, there are 1,500 people. On average, 65 to 70% reach contact with their higher self on their own. We try to help the rest through assistance. There's a whole team of people who help with this. And specifically, finding that light which opens up as identification dissolves, it's not difficult.
It's just a person's perception that it's impossible to reach this point, yes?
That it's incredibly difficult. If we define enlightenment as precisely this specific state, then yes, it's entirely achievable. But full holiness, that state where there is only light, just pure light and absolutely no blocks at all, that's already, of course, a separate topic. That's really a long process, not for your whole life, but definitely for many years. So you really need to keep moving forward, work through your blocks and purify yourself. And at the same time, as I mentioned, we have a technique for determining spirituality through a photograph. You can, after all, that's exactly why we created it in the school. So you can check your results. So it's not just some subjective thing like, oh, I'm developing spiritually. Maybe I'm already glowing all over. In other words, there's a technique to clearly determine how much you're actually shining.
Without any abstraction?
Without any abstraction. You can really clearly understand whether you have it or not, whether there are still any blocks left or not. How bright is the radiance of your inner spark? Is it vivid, strong? Is it moving? Or has it become static and frozen?
All right. If we return to the concept of the term matrix, so there is some kind of system and we are inside it. Why are we here then? In other words, why do we even need to be in this system? Why were we placed here?
It's a question of meaning, yes, of meaning. Why do we even come here at all? From the experience I have, every planet is like a sandbox. Any planet, that is, any world where one can live, where one can incarnate, is, roughly speaking, like a kind of computer game. And it's like, why, for instance, do we play specific kinds of intense horror games like Silent Hill or something else? Or exactly why is it that we choose to watch those types of frightening movies? We gain a certain experience. We experience certain emotions. It's the same thing here. That is, every single planet is essentially just like a playground. You come to this playground to play and enjoy yourself right here, to experience certain emotions. Roughly speaking, to put it simply, to get pleasure, the souls who enjoy this come here and play here. Those who don't like it simply don't come here and don't play here.
If you were already aware here initially, it means you made this choice yourself.
If you came here to this matrix, it means that at some point you decided this for yourself. You know, I really get a kick out of people who say things like, I ended up on this planet by mistake, or I was tricked.
Let me out.
Let me out. I have no idea what I'm doing here at all. When you access your higher self, you immediately start to understand what you're doing here and how you ended up here. And most likely you will see that you're still here for many, many, many more lives on this planet. It's not like that for everyone, but for many it is.
Tell me, please, do you honestly think this matrix, this entire system, can somehow suppress us? And why exactly would it want to do that? So, why is it, let's say, not beneficial for the system if everyone just walked around, lived happily, and were enlightened and awakened?
If we look at it on a global scale, it's a kind of game. These are simply the rules of the game here. With
Elements of masochism. With
elements of masochism, yes. But again, if this didn't exist, you wouldn't have gone through this path. You wouldn't have experienced the dark side, so to speak. You wouldn't have known what it means to be asleep. You would have lived only, so to speak, in the light. And these facets, you wouldn't have seen them. If the soul came here, it means it needed to come here. Everyone has their own path. And about the matrix, well, it's just the form here. That's how it is. That's just how it behaves. The rules of the game, they sometimes change. They're not always the same. You know, it's like a season in a TV series. One ends, a new one begins. Right now, we're really in a new season. I call it the amplification of vibrations, a movement toward the light, toward awareness. And this is actually very easy to prove. For any spiritual practices back in the 20th century, or even the 19th, these took much longer to achieve than they do now. Back in the Middle Ages, for example, to reach this so-called enlightenment, you would spend 20 or 30 years in a monastery with some teacher. You would sit there and work your way toward it. According to descriptions from ancient books, it would take as long to reach what modern people can achieve in about 6 months. The length of a typical course, right? About 6 months. And at the same time, as they say, without even putting down your cup of coconut milk latte, of course.
So, I have a question then. If these are the fundamental rules of the game here, within this complex matrix that, one way or another, essentially forces us to accept these rules, then as we gradually accept them, we begin to experience various emotions, thoughts, and internal states. How can we distinguish between our true states and those imposed from outside? For these players, I mean?
Again, what do we mean by our true selves? If by our true selves we mean the actual higher self, something that is really quite deep, that transcendent level, then that's the direction to move toward. Because everything else that the mind generates, you see, that's the thing. Again, the mind is like a computer. It still generates everything based on the experiences it has lived through. That's why the mind doesn't have anything of its own. When people say to feel your true self, that you are your true self, that's your spirit, meaning that eternal part that came here. All other aspects of this are a digital computer interface system, which ideally should function effectively to connect with the higher self. So, in general, what was the mind created for, in my view, in my experience? The mind is needed in order to bring this multidimensionality, its energy, here into physical reality, to serve as a kind of conduit. A conduit, or rather, not exactly a conduit, more like an interpreter of the spirit's energy into the human world. For example, as I speak now, I always feel a certain contact with the higher, but I still try to describe it somehow using my own words. I still construct long chains of phrases, use complex participial constructions, ideas, and even more participial ones. For this, we truly need the mind in order to interpret exactly what you feel, to sort of channel it effectively. Here, right here into the reality of our present world. And the mind itself has absolutely nothing that it can truly call its own. As soon as the mind starts to think that it has something of its own, that's actually not true at all. Because it's just drawing conclusions from propaganda, advertising, or the opinions of influential people who surround us. And you must work to understand what you really want, what you truly feel, and in general, why you came here to this life at all. The only method, no matter how it sounds, is to touch the higher self and see everything from there.
And can we perhaps draw an analogy here? If we consider the Matrix as a game in which we are characters, can we say that the goal of our game is to actually get out? Just to leave the system entirely, to finish, so to speak, and to fully complete the game?
Not always. We have looked into the topic of purpose many times with the guys. Yes, that's actually the main thing. Most people come into contact with the higher self for this reason. To understand their purpose, there are people who really do leave the Matrix and so on. But for the most part, when it comes to the higher self, the people who come are already advanced, already awakened, who have mostly already left the matrix. And their main purposes are to conduct and channel energy, focusing on a special and unique spectrum of frequency. For example, they work on spreading awareness, spreading unconditional love, and going through things related to human relationships and emotional growth. They might even be allowing themselves to be a specific person in this world, and so on. Usually, these missions are of a much higher order than just leaving the matrix behind for good. These are the people who eventually come to me for deeper understanding. But on a global scale, for society as a whole, I think that society's participation is really about leaving the matrix, and participation, as odd as it may sound, is probably not the case, because they still haven't finished playing in the dream.
And that brings me to my next question. How can one maintain their spiritual integrity while interacting with people who have not yet awakened? So, is this even possible in general? I mean, we are surrounded by all sorts of characters. How can we make it so that it doesn't affect us? At the very least, so that we remain in a certain balance, and the matrix doesn't pull us back in through the people we are around, the people we interact with?
It is certainly possible, and again, ideally, this is done through the higher self. Because if you are in the higher self, that is, in this eternal part of yourself, and you interact with people through it, you understand that in front of you is, well, a person who is essentially asleep. Why take offense at an alcoholic? Why take offense at a drug addict who is currently under the heavy influence of substances? Well, it's kind of strange. I mean, you just see that he's not quite himself. He's in a deeply altered state of human consciousness. It's the same here when you interact with people. With a person who is sitting there with a lot of mental blocks, you realize that he is in an altered state of consciousness. If you can somehow find a way to get through to him, then you should go ahead and do it. If, for example, I see that I personally can't get through to him at all, then I just accept him exactly as he is, because there is really no other way to handle the situation. Sometimes in the course I say that accessing the higher self is an altered state of consciousness, but in reality the true altered state of consciousness is right here. In fact, most of us are currently asleep, and it is only when we finally return to the higher self that we truly wake up, become fully enlightened, and begin to develop and start to grow. We are speaking of that very sacred inner radiance, the profound essence we have been talking about here today.
In the video, the concept of the collective ego was also mentioned. I would like to know what you think about it.
It's like she describes all the parts of the matrix. One of the parts of the matrix is the so-called collective ego. Essentially, it's the egregore of the ego, which is fueled, it is nourished by all ego missions, so to speak.
That is, these are certain beliefs held by many people, which you might unconsciously follow at times.
Yes, yes. And
If you are not enlightened, not awakened, not conscious, then you fall under this influence. So, how can a person come to this feeling, to live in the present moment, here and now? What is the main thing they need to do to embark on this path? The path, for example, because you say that in your course, for instance, there are more experienced people, those who have already, in one way or another.
they are different, but more often they are more experienced, yes. To be in the present moment, here and now, it's kind of like asking, what should I do to be full? You need to get up and make yourself some food. It's the same thing. To be in the present moment, here and now, you need to start practicing being in the moment, here and now. That is, it exists, it's on the internet, it's basically everywhere. Michael Newton has it, Eckhart has it, I think I have it in my course in the first month, maybe in the 5th or 6th lecture, I don't even remember now. It's a practice. To learn to be in the present moment, here and now, you have to practice it. You need to do a certain specific technique, and gradually, after 2 or 3 weeks, you'll really start to catch the true essence of life. You'll feel it directly, just like that. The real flow of life, which manifests itself right here and now in this very present moment.
So a person's life can change dramatically. Yes, and
Even just from this practice, it can, and I'll say more, even through this practice, you can reach your higher self. That is, it's not necessary to go through what I always talk about. You can reach the higher self through the present moment, here and now. The higher self, God, the absolute. It's just that it takes longer this way. It's just that this isn't exactly the main technique for that purpose. Take Eckhart Tolle, for example. He is in the present moment, here and now. He speaks directly from it. He definitely has access to the spirit, but if he practiced specific techniques for connecting with the spirit, he would be even stronger.
Daniil, thank you for your answers. Friends, be sure to write your questions and impressions. We see and read everything. It's truly very important to us. You can also find all the links in the description below this video.
My dear friends, for 10 years now, I've been teaching a course on the higher self for a Russian-speaking audience. During this time, about 4,000 to 4,500 people have passed through my school. I've been working on this topic for 20 years. Today, my school is one of the largest and most famous specialized schools for connecting with the higher self in the Russian-speaking world. And then I suddenly realized that it is finally time to reach out to the masses, so to speak. Yes, to the much wider world and to the incredibly vast expanse of the entire global internet. All the professional skills I have carefully developed, all the dedicated practices I have refined, and all the quick entries, thorough checks, and rigorous exams I have built over the last 10 years are now being brought to a truly global level. I now invite you to join a brand new, specially discounted group for the comprehensive Return to the True Self course, now available in English for students everywhere. 6 months of work on stopping the internal dialogue, working with blocks, and focusing on actually accessing the higher self. Answering both simple and complex questions regarding purpose, contact with God, and with the planet. Answering basically any questions on any topic, including work, relationships, and anything at all. Manifesting desires through the higher self, viewing past lives through the higher self, and everything that didn't fit into the first 5 months in a separate 6th one. And after that, you'll have the opportunity to join the alumni club, as well as the chance to continue your studies at the 2nd level of the school. The price for the discounted groups is discounted. You can find all the information about this below at the link under this video.